Okay, hello everybody. This is the second session of the Emerging Trends in XML Translation class. I will be giving a slideshow here, and throughout the slideshow I will be pausing the slides and giving demonstrations. And one of the caveats that I always give at the beginning of these videos is unless I make an egregious mistake, I'm just going to try to recover from any mistake I make and continue to record. So with that said, let's go take a look at these fundamentals. So the second class is XML Fundamentals. These slides cover the concepts covered in the second session, XML Fundamentals. Some of the slides are repeats from the first class that we had. Some of them, obviously a lot of them are new. This is an online session. Please view the video and follow the instructions along the way. So if I say, for example, pause the video and complete the following exercise, please do that. I think you'll catch on along the way. So as a reminder, this week is the XML Fundamentals class, so we will be looking at what is XML, why do we care. We'll be looking at elements and attributes, well-formed versus valid, and then we'll be looking at XSLT. So hopefully in preparation for this class you've already read the beginning XML book, chapters 1, 2, 3 through page 62, and chapter 8 through page 284. I realize that's probably a lot of reading. It'll get better as the class progresses. I mean, better in terms of less reading and probably even a little bit less confusing. So, and then as we always do, just kind of a look ahead to the next week. We'll be having a quiz on XML, and then we're going to go into the introduction to XLIF and XLIF Core. And in preparation for that, please read the assigned reading before that class, which is next week. Okay? So preparing for today's exercises, it will be very useful for you to install a good text editor. The files for these exercises that we're about to do will be available in the resource files directory. Oh, I guess I'm actually doing one better than that. I'm saying here that the installation files for these text editors will be available in the resource files directory in D2L. So I'll make sure that those are there. For Windows, I recommend Notepad++. There's the URL there. For Mac and Windows, I recommend Sublime Text. That's free, but they will be asking you to pay for it every third or fourth save or so. So just bear that in mind. And then also for the Mac, I recommend Text Wrangler, and that's available at that URL there. I also suggest that you become comfortable navigating command line. There's a tutorial for Windows in the first bullet there, and a tutorial for the Mac in the second bullet there. That might be helpful if you've had no experience navigating in Windows before. So to invoke the command line in Windows, you go under Accessories and you'll see a command prompt. Just double click that or single click that. I'm not sure how that goes. And in in Mac, you have to go into your Utilities folder and then click on the Terminal app. In each case, I recommend that you put these applications, the command line prompts or the terminal app, in your ribbon at the bottom of the page. Hopefully you know how to do that. Okay. So let's get into XML. The reason we spend time on XML is that XML is the underlying standard from which all open standards are written. That means that XML itself is an open standard. And it's used then, the syntax is used to write all of the localization translation open standards. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It's available at that URL there. It's a World Wide Web Consortium standard. It is a text-based markup format. XML is the method for creating, editing, storing, and processing electronic data and documents. XML is ubiquitous. XML is the standard in which all localization standards are modeled. Why do we care? Well, this class is about emerging trends and best practices in translation and localization. All of the translation and localization open standards we work with will be XML vocabularies. Each are made up of XML elements and attributes. Each file, whether it's an XLIF file, a TMX file, a TBX file, or what have you, must be XML well-formed and must be XML valid per the DTDs or the schemas. I noticed that I have DITA written in there. I'll correct that. That must be a copy and paste left over from the last class. A good XLIF practitioner understands XML and can troubleshoot at the code level. Okay, so we're going to go into all of this in this class. So this is XML. This is rendered XML. It's the Portland State web page from a few years ago, but the current web page is the same. It's XML. If you look at it in code view, you can see the actual XML. And in order to look at it in code view, what you would do is you would right click and pick view page source. There might be slight variations depending on your browser, but that's the gist of it. And then when you look at it in code view, you see that there's this thing called a doctype declaration that tells us that this is actually XHTML, which means it's an XML version of HTML. Okay, so for example, this div here, welcome to Weird and Wonderful Portland, is actually XML, and you can see it modeled on a to the right there in the XML code. So the XML code is written as XML, and then the browser renders the XML code. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to kind of create your what I would call your workstation for the various exercises that we'll be doing and for the projects that you'll be doing as part of this class. So I'm going to ask you to go to D2L and download the XML zip file in the resource files directory. I'm going to walk you through this in just a second. And then on your desktop, create a folder called ET for Emerging Trends, or Emerging Trends in Translation. You can call it whatever you want. You can put it wherever you want, but these I'll kind of build on this, and you'll have to remember to substitute in whatever you called it and wherever you put it, or you can just do it the exact way that I'm doing it here. Whether you're on Windows or on the Mac, it'll all work the same. Download the XML file from D2L and put it into your ET folder, and then unzip the file, and then observe that you have in that file a DTD folder and a XSL folder. And whether you have, as you can see in my example here, I have ET and then actually XML folder inside an XML folder. That's because of the way I unzip it. You'll just have to manage that. So I'm going to escape from presentation mode here, and I'm going to walk through those steps. So on my desktop, I'm creating a folder, and I'm going to call it ET. Okay, and then I'm going to go to my D2L, and when you go to D2L, you'll probably go into D2L in this home directory. So what I want you to do then is go into course content, and then please go to the resource files directory, or which I'm already in here. Okay, and you'll notice that there are some that this will build. I'll put more and more resource files in as the class gets bigger, but basically I would recommend that anything that you find in this resource files directory you might want to put in your ET folder. In fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, in my ET folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call that class-downloads. And from there, I'm going to, if I wanted, for example, since I'm on the Mac, I would download this xmarker setup exe file into this class downloads. If I were on the Mac, I would download this xmarker dmg file into my downloads, but I'm not going to do that step right now for the sake of time. I'm just going to leave that folder there, and I'm going to go back to my instructions, which say download the XML file from D2L resource files into the ET folder directory. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I have my XML file here. I'm going to download, and depending on your browser settings, it's going to ask you where you want to download that file. In my case, I'm going to go to the ET directory, and I'm going to download it right there. So I'm going to save. Okay, and it tells me that the zip file has been saved to that directory. So I'm going to put D2L away for the moment. And this how you do this next step depends on whether you have a Mac or Windows. If you have a Mac, you simply double-click on that file, and it will create the directory for you. If you're on Windows, you can right-click, and you can say Extract All. And I'm just going to let it extract right into the default where it asks me to extract it. The unfortunate thing with Windows is that will give me an XML folder that has an XML folder in it. We can work around that, but for now I'm just going to leave that the way it is. So I'm going to extract. Okay, so it created the directory there. Okay, so if I look in this directory, as I said before, because of the way I extracted it in Windows, I have another XML file. So the path is that I'm on my desktop, I'm in my ET directory, I'm in my XML directory, there's another XML directory, but inside that directory I have two, excuse me, I'm going to start using the word folder now because some people don't understand the word directory. I have two folders. I have a DTD folder and an XSL folder. Okay, so that's good. So we have those. I'm going to just put this away for the moment and go back into presentation mode. So hopefully you were able to do that. You can pause and do those. You can rewind the video to watch me do it again if you get stuck, or you can always ask me for your help, or excuse me, to help you in that if you're having difficulty with that. So back to the slides. We've created our workspace for this class. Now let's talk about XML elements and attributes. XML Element Basics. An element is the most basic XML building block. Every XML file must have at least one element. An XML file consists of just one element. I guess that's what I just said. Elements have names. Names begin with a letter, certain Unicode values defined there at that URL, an underscore or a colon, and can optionally be followed by any combination of letters, digits, underscores, colons, and periods. The strict definition for that is in the reading that you did, the XML reading, so I'll just continue on here. So elements have a start tag and an end tag. In case of empty elements, the end tag is implied. So a start tag has a less than character, followed by a name, followed by 0 or more attributes, followed by the closing greater than symbol. So okay, okay, it took me a second to figure this out. That's one of those, unless it's an egregious error, I'm not going to redo it. So the following is an example. So we have the less than symbol here. We have the name of the element. We have an optional space, and then a couple of attributes here. We'll talk about attributes in a minute. And then we have closing greater than sign. An end tag has the less than sign followed by a slash character, followed by the name, followed by the greater than. So this, for example, is an end tag. So we have a start tag and we have an end tag. An empty element, however, has the less than character followed by the name, followed by 0 or more attributes, followed by the slash character, followed by the close character. So this is something to keep in mind. If you have an empty element, it can be as simple as this here, where you just have the angle, the name, the space, the optional space, the required slash, and the required greater than symbol. So this is a start tag, this is an end tag, and this is an empty element. So that's pretty much how elements and tags work. Okay, so in element construction, and a non-empty element is a start tag and an end tag and everything between, which can be other elements, text, and attributes. XML comments and processing instructions are intentionally omitted in this introductory definition. An empty element is an element with no content. The representation of an empty element is either a start tag immediately followed by an end tag or an empty element. And you can read more about that in this URL. So let's look at some examples. This is an element, and it's important to understand that it's not just the tags, but it's also everything that's inside the element. So this is a P element. In this case, this P element is not empty. It has text, and it has a start tag and a close tag. The second bullet, this is an element, document with, this carriage return or this line feed is just fine, with an attribute, and this is the start tag, and then this is the end tag here, slash document, and then everything in between. So this element contains other elements, in this case a term, and text, and empty elements, and so forth. Okay, the third bullet then is an example of an empty element with attributes. So it's the name of the element is img. It's got a couple of attributes, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then it's got a slash, and then it's got close greater than symbol. So it's important to know that this doesn't have any content, in that there is nothing inside this element, but it does have attributes. The following bullet is not an element. So this paragraph start tag with nothing else after it is not an element. We need more. We either need it to be an empty element, or we need to have a paragraph end tag before we can call this a full element. It's a start tag, but it's not an element. Okay, XML Attribute Basics. An attribute is information about its host element. An XML element may have 0 or more attributes. An attribute, when present, is part of the start tag. Attributes have names, and they have the same constraints that we talked about before. An attribute has a name followed by an equal character, followed by a single or double quote. So in programming, we call this a single quote, and we call this a double quote, followed by the value, followed by a single or double quote. For example, ID equals double quote C1 end double quote, or name equals single quote Telecaster single quote. These are attributes. So elements versus attributes. My rule of thumb is that an element in most cases is the noun, and an attribute is the adjective. So in this case, I have an element called apple, and that's the noun, and then some descriptors, some adjectives about that apple. It's medium, and its size is medium, and its price is inexpensive. Okay. Other parts of XML worth mentioning. For this class, it's important to know that these things exist, but we will not go into any of these, what I consider to be important, but to know about, but we won't use these in an introductory session in XML, or we won't go into any detail about them. There's an XML declaration. This comes at the end, at the beginning of some XML files. It just tells you what version of the XML and what encoding it is. You see that it's got a slightly different syntax. It's got the less than followed by a question mark and a bunch of stuff, and then delimited by a closing question mark and then a closing greater than sign. A doctype declaration, we'll talk about a little bit more in class, has less than, and we call this a bang, angle bang, but it's less than, exclamation point, doctype, and then something that explains what what's going on in here. We'll talk more about this as the class continues. There's such a thing as an XML comment. This has a less than and exclamation point, and 2 dashes followed by the comment, followed by 2 dashes, followed by the greater than sign. A processing instruction has the less than sign, a question mark, and then the processing instruction, and then another question mark, and then the closing tag. It looks very similar to the XML declaration, except an XML declaration will always have this XML and a processing instruction, which can take place anywhere in your file, will have processing instructions. And we're not going to go into that much of that in this class at all. And then finally, just to round it out, character data section, CData section, has this funny syntax here. It has some instruction here, and then it has some funny syntax to end it. We will not go into CData at all, CData sections at all in this class. Okay, so if we put it all together, we have our XML declaration at the top. We have a doctype declaration, and then we get into the actual document itself. The root element is Apple. We see the start tag and the end tag. Apple has a couple of attributes here, and Apple has it looks like 3 paragraphs, each of which has text in it, and then Apple has this comment here, which and then we have the Apple close tag. So that's an example of an XML document that uses all of the things that we'll talk about in this class. Okay, so that's elements and attributes. XML can be either well-formed or valid. So why do we care? So all of the translations and localization standards that we'll be working with are XML vocabularies. Files that are malformed, not well-formed, will not process. Files that are invalid, not valid against the DTD or the XML schema, will not process. We'll talk about DTDs and XML schemas in a minute. Despite how good the translation tools are, there will come a time in most XLIF practitioners' careers that they will need to troubleshoot malformed or invalid files. So we'll show you what that's all about in a second here. So well-formed versus valid. An XML document with correct syntax is called well-formed, and there's a you can read more about it at that URL there. An XML document that's validated against an XML schema or a DTD is well-formed and is valid per the rules established by the DTD or the schema. Okay. So well-formed, there's a bunch of criteria for well-formed. The beginning, end, and empty tags that delimit the elements are correctly nested with none missing and none overlapping. So for example, this first sample is correct. We have a P tag which ends here, and within the P tag we have a B tag, whoops, and within the B tag we have an I tag, and none of these tags overlaps. The next one is incorrect. We have a P tag with a B tag that then starts an I tag, and then we terminate the B tag before we terminate the nested I tag. So that is incorrect, and that is malformed. Elements are case sensitive. The beginning tag and the end tag must match exactly. So the first example here is correct. It has a paragraph, some content, and then the close tag paragraph. The second tag is incorrect because these are case sensitive. So in this case, the start tag starts with a lowercase p, but the end tag starts with an uppercase P, making this malformed. Tag names cannot contain any of the following characters, and you see all of these characters here, nor a space character, and cannot start with a dash or a period or a numeric digit. You'll notice that the things that disqualify the start tag, the first character of the start tag, do not include an underscore. So an underscore is perfectly legal. But if it starts with a dash, a period, or a numeric digit, or any of these characters up here, it's malformed. So in our example, H1 is correct. H-plus-1 is correct. Now we're just talking about element names here. This is incorrect because we're starting with a digit. 1H is incorrect. Also, this is incorrect, H plus 1, because plus is one of these characters that's not legal. Okay? To continue with well-formed, there needs to be a single root element that contains all of the other elements. So in this case, HTML is the root element, and it has a properly ended element. In this case, we have an incorrect malform example where we have the HTML which starts and terminates, and then after the terminating root element, we have another start tag and another end tag. That is malformed. Okay, so continuing on with well-formed, excuse me, no attribute may appear more than one time in a start tag. So, for example, we have a correct version that says paragraph start, style attribute with some information. In this case, we have a malformed situation where we have paragraph with style equals bold and style equals italic. You can't do that. Okay, XML reserved characters ampersand and less than must be escaped as entities amp or LT. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but in this case we have grapes, amp, ampersand, and apples are less than $2 per pound. That's correct. Now, if we didn't escape those as entities because they are reserved characters, it would be incorrect. So we have paragraph, grapes, ampersand, not escaped, and apples are less than $2 a pound, not escaped. That's malformed. Okay. Content must be delimited with a beginning and end tag. So the correct syntax here is that we have a beginning and end tag. The incorrect syntax here is that we have text that precedes the beginning tag and then falls after the end tag. So if we saw this just without a root element, that would be incorrect and malformed. Attributes delimited with a quotation mark, single or double quote. So for example, we have an attribute here that starts with our double quotes. That's okay, or it could be single quotes. But in this case, we have an attribute that has no quotes. That's malformed. So hint, hint, you'll probably see examples of most of this on your first quiz. It would be good to look at this well-formed page to see if to draw your answers from. Content contains only properly encoded legal Unicode characters, and the legal code Unicode characters are listed here in the that link. So we have a correct Unicode character here, and we have an incorrect Unicode character there because it falls outside of that range. So students are not expected to know which Unicode characters fall outside the legal range for XML, just need to know that a range exists. So hint, hint, you will probably not get a question like this on your quiz. Okay. Okay, so there's just a couple more well-formed rules, and we'll complete them here. All entities except for the amp, the less than, the greater than, the apostrophe, and the quote must be declared. So to declare an entity, you actually have to have a doctype declaration. In this case, we have entity university has this content. So if we say that the students go to the university, and then we substitute Portland State University to learn about DITA, that is well formed. But in this case, we don't have the entity defined, but we do have the entity in the text here. And since we don't define that entity anywhere, that is malformed. It's a little bit confusing that it's not invalid because we're talking about DTDs here, but it's just the fact that there's an entity that has not been defined that makes it malformed. Okay? So testing for well-formedness. You can test your XML files to see if they are well-formed here at this URL. This is the one we'll use in class. Note, you can go to the resource files on D2L for this class and download the XML zip file, which we've already done. And many of the files shown in these slides will be in that directory. You can use those to test your system. Or you can just copy and paste from these slides. Okay. So to do the copy and paste method, you either open the simple .xml file in your text editor, as we talked about there, paste it into the window, and click the validate button. So I'm going to escape the slides here, and I'm going to go into my ET directory, which I created. Okay, and I'm going to go into my XML directory, and I'm going to go into the DTD subfolder, and with my let me close all these. Sorry, I've got a bunch of things open here, and I'm just going to close them. Okay, so now I have my text editor. In this case, you might have Notepad++, you might have Sublime, and you might have Text Wrangler. I would not recommend you use the Mac Text Edit, or I'm sure whatever that the Mac, I think it's called Text Edit, because that will cause problems with the quotes, and you will have an invalid situation. So if you're taking a quiz, for example, in our class, make sure that you use Text Wrangler, which is on the student piece, the Macs in the Mac lab. Do not use Text Edit. So in this case, I have my Notepad++, and I'm going to open my simple XML. Okay, and I'm going to go to that URL that was defined in the slides. So it said to go here. Copy that. I'm going to pull up a browser. And I'll paste that here. Okay, so that takes me to the XML validation website. Okay, so then the slides tell me to copy everything in my text editor and to paste it into this window and to click validate. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm going to hit the validate button. And it says no errors were found. Okay, so that's good news. Okay, one of the things also that's worth mentioning for this website, it's using the back button and so forth is kind of problematic. So what I always do is I just backspace till I get into the xmlvalidation.com, and I hit enter, and that puts me back in a fresh state for this utility, something that might be interesting to you. Okay, so let's bring the slides back in. Hopefully everybody got that result. You can pause and try that yourself. Please do pause and try that yourself, and then start the slides again when you're finished. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully that worked for everybody. And then, as I said, you observe that the no errors were found, and that's a happy result. Okay, so there's also the file upload method. So what you do then is you click the choose file, you navigate to your simple XML, and then you choose that XML file, and then you click validate, and then you hopefully will get the no errors found message again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to escape from this presentation. I'm going to go back into my XML validation, and remember the trick that I told you to get to the fresh state of the of this tool is to click xmlvalidation.com again, just to make sure that you're not in a funny state. So now I'm going to browse, and I'm going to go to my ET folder, my XML folder, and my second XML folder, DTD, and I'm going to select simple XML. I'm going to open that. Okay, so it has that file then uploaded, and then I'm going to validate. and it tells me no errors were found. So that's a happy, I'll just pull this up a little bit. No errors were found, so that's a happy message. Okay, back to the slides. Oh, and I always like to put myself back into the proper state here, so I'm going to go to xmlvalidation.com and hit enter again, just to make sure that I'm in a good place with this tool. Okay, resuming the file. So please try that. Pause the tape, pause the video. You see I say tape because I'm an old timer and remember actually taping with tape. So pause the video, try that, and then come back. Okay, welcome back everybody. Hopefully you got this happy message when you tried that. So that was well formed. What about valid? XML files with a doctype declaration or a schema declaration must validate against their DTD or XML schema. For this class, we will only discuss DTD validation and for only very basic structures. An XML file without a doctype declaration has to be well formed. And an example, okay, so this is an example of simple.xml, which does not have a doctype declaration, which means it does not need to validate against a DTD. However, an XML file that does have a doctype declaration does need to validate against that DTD. Now, this is a little bit tricky, so I'll carefully explain this. There are two ways of having a DTD. You can have an internal DTD declaration like this example here, which actually has everything here in this area where it says doctype class square brace, and then it actually has the DTD here, and then the end square brace end doctype, so the greater than sign. So that means that everything that's in the content of the XML file must validate against this DTD. We'll explain how DTDs work a little bit later, but for now I just want to show you the difference between an internal and an external. So this is internal. Another way of doing it is that there's an external DTD, which it must validate against. So in this case, we have doctype psuclass, and we're saying that that's a system identifier, and that this DTD is in the system, and this XML document must validate against this external DTD. So that's just the difference between internal and external. This is a file on a system somewhere. So an external DTD has a system identifier that looks like this. It has the doctype, it has the name of the DTD, it declares that it's a system declaration, and then it tells us where that file resides. Okay, so this refers to an external file in the same directory as the XML file called psuclass.dtd. Okay, so the psuclass.dtd is in your D2L in the XML directory that we downloaded. In this case, if you were to look at it, it has an element, and another element, and then an entity declaration. So I want you to follow along with this because this will be on your quiz. I will give you a literal description of a DTD, and then I will ask you to create that DTD in text editor, in your text editor of choice. So I'll explain more of this later, but this is our first time. So I'll explain literally. What this says is the root element is psuclass. It contains exactly one intro followed by exactly one conclusion. That means that you must have a root element of psuclass. You must have exactly one intro element followed by exactly one conclusion element. Intro contains only parsed character data, which is text. So this is PC data. Conclusion contains only parsed character data, which is text. Now we haven't done anything with the entity, and that's okay. What it also says, this DTD says that there's an entity called University, and its content is this bit of text, Portland State University. Okay, so validating with an external DTD. So what you're going to do for this exercise, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do it, I want you to go back to the slides and copy the slide with the external DTD, and then paste it into your XML validation window just as is. It will prompt you to copy in your DTD in the next slide after you click validate. It will prompt you to add your DTD. So then I want you to go to the DTD slide and copy this and then paste it into the validation window, and then click continue validation, and hopefully you will have the happy no errors message. So I'm going to demonstrate that, and then I'm going to ask you to do it. So I'm going to go out of presentation mode. Okay, I'm going to go back into my slides, and you will have downloaded these slides. Okay, and I'm going to go to the slide that has the external DTD declaration, and you need to do exactly as I'm doing. Copy, start at the beginning, and then I'm going to hold my shift key down, and I'm going to copy everything right up to the last character. Unfortunately, if it gives you, if you go past the last character, that's bad. So then backspace, as you can see that I did, and what I have is everything beginning with the XML declaration, ending with the close tag for PSU class. I'm going to say Control-C to copy, and I'm going to go back to my validation. I'm going to paste into this window, okay, and I'm going to hit validate, and as promised, it's going to prompt me for a DTD. It says the file psuclass.dtd is being referenced. Please copy it here so that the validation can continue. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides, and I'm going to page down, and I'm going to find the PSU DTD slide, and I'm going to put my cursor here at the very first element, and I'm going to hold my shift key down and go down and grab everything right up until the greater than sign in my entity declaration there. Notice that it put in an extra space there, so I'm going to backspace so that I get only the right up to the last greater than sign. I'm going to say Control-C, and I'm going to then go into back into my validation tool where it's asked me to paste the DTD. I'm going to say Control-V. On the Mac it's Command-V, and then I have my DTD there, and then I'm going to hit my Continue Validation button. Okay, and it says no errors were found, and that it looked at the XML document and the DTD, and everything was fine. So that's a happy sign. So now I'm going to put my tool back into the state that I like. Oops. I'm going to backspace until I get to xml.com. You can always just paste that URL back in if you need to. Okay, so now my tool is fresh and ready awaiting the next time I need to use it. Okay, so here we are. Please go try that yourself. Okay, welcome back. I hope that worked for you. Back to the presentation. So the DTD syntax for sequences and choices are as follows. And you'll get this probably, and I'll do truth in advertising. On the first quiz, a lot of people struggle with this, but by the end, because we build mental muscle and we repeat this a lot, you'll be just fine and you'll understand this stuff. So in an elements content model, we can indicate that child elements must occur in an order with a comma. So the first example there, element doc, I'm defining the doc element, and I'm saying that it must have a start, exactly one start, comma, followed by middle, comma, followed by conclude. That's one start, one middle, and one conclude in that order. Okay, so then to the second bullet, or we can indicate that we have a choice, and for that we use the pipe element. So in this case, we're saying the element doc can have exactly one start, or exactly one middle, or exactly one conclusion. Okay, that's the difference between the commas and the pipes. We can also do cardinality. That means how many times can this or must this element appear. So if there's no indicator, that means the element must appear exactly once. That's all of the examples that I've shown you so far follow that condition. If there's a question mark after the element name, that means it may appear 0 or 1 time. If there's a plus, that means the element may appear 1 or more times. It cannot appear 0 times. It must appear 1 time or infinite number of times. If there's a star or an asterisk, that means the element can appear 0 times or infinite times, 0 or more times. Okay? Here are some examples of that. To declare an element that can have both text and child elements, the content model must use the following convention. So we have the parentheses, we have the PC data, the pound PC data, all in capital letters, that means text, or an intro or a conclusion. So that means for the doc element, it can either have just text, or it can have text and any number of intros, or text and any number of conclusions, or text and any number of intros and conclusions. It's kind of like kind of free form there because it has the asterisk. Okay, so the PC data must appear first in the element list, and the cardinality indicator must be a star at the end. That's kind of a strange looking star. I wonder how I got that there. It's not like what the asterisk that I'm used to seeing. Attribute syntax in DTDs. An attribute can be assigned in several different data types and default values. For this class, we will only deal with text attributes with no default. And in attributes, we indicate that by calling it C data, character data. The attribute declarations include the element name, the attribute name, and the attribute types, and the attribute value declarations. So let's look at some examples. So in this example, for the element doc, we have an attribute list, and in that list we have just one attribute. Its name is number, its type is character data, and it's implied, which means you can have it or not have it. The second example, we have intro, and we have for the attribute list of intro, you can have 2 attributes. You can have version, or you must have version because it's required, and it is character data. You can optionally have implied, number, which is implied, and it's also character data. Okay? So if we put it all together, we have this DTD. We have an element called doc. This is the root element. It must have exactly one start element. It can have one or more middle elements, and it must then be followed by exactly one conclude element. Its attribute is number, which is text, and it's optional. It's implied. Okay, so now let's continue down. The start element is a mixed, means it can have either text or paragraph or both, as many texts and as many paragraphs as you'd like, because it has the star. Its attributes, it has a required attribute of version, which is text, and an optional attribute of number, which is also text. Okay, so to continue down, we've looked at start, and we've looked at now we're looking at middle. Middle is also mixed. It can have the same mix of paragraphs or text. It has no attributes. And similarly, conclude, which is the last element in the doc elements, and it contains exactly one paragraph. It must have one paragraph. And then paragraph is defined as just text. So paragraph can't have any elements in it, but it can have text. Okay? So using that definition, this is valid. We have a doctype declaration to that DTD that we just talked about. Its doc element has number, and it has one start element, which has an attribute of version, and it has a paragraph. Remember, we said we could have one or more middle, so in this case we have two middles, and middle can have text or paragraphs. In this case we have text. This is the first, and then paragraph middle. This is the second middle. And then conclude must have exactly one paragraph, which is this is the conclusion. Okay, so that's valid. This is not valid for a couple of reasons. The DTD says you can have exactly one start element, but this one has two start elements, and also the start element is missing a required version attribute, the second start element there, making this invalid. Hint, hint, this could show up on the quiz. Okay, so that's XML elements and attributes, well formed and valid. Now let's talk about XSL. So XSL is Extensible Style Sheet Language. XSL is a family of recommendations for defining XML file transformations and presentation, consisting of three parts: XSLT for transforming XML, XML path, which we shorthand as XPath, used by XSLT and many other languages to access or refer to parts of an XML document, XSL formatting objects, which is XSLFO, for specifying formatting semantics, used largely to create PDF files. A style sheet gives an unfortunate limiting connotation. XSL is the standard with which these translation open standards are transformed. And I know that the slide now says DITA, but I will fix that in our slides. Why do we care? Each of the translation and localization open standards is an XML vocabulary. These are transformed in nearly all cases with XSL. There are no 100% foolproof transformations that work in all scenarios. I see I have another DITA thing there. I apologize for that. I'll fix these slides. And then, despite how well your team or your vendor writes XSL, there will very likely be cases when the code will need to be adjusted. Okay. So XSL workflow works something like this for an XML transformation. You begin with a source XML file and a desired target XML or text format. You write the XSLT that will transform the source to target. You apply the XSL processing, sometimes via an automated XML tool, sometimes from the command line. We're going to do it from the command line in this class. Then you observe the resulting files. And note, you can go into your D2L, as I said before, which you've already done, and download the XML zip file, and then many of the files shown in these slides will be on your system. Okay? So here's an example of a simple command line transformation. You have a working directory, both for the Mac or for the Windows. You have an XSL processor, saxon9.jar, which is in that download that I provided for you. You have a source XML file, class.xml, and then you have the XSL script. So the way that works is that you have your source XML file. In this case, it's class.xml, and it's in a format that has psuclass as its root element. So that's our source. We want to transform it into a different format. So in this case, we have an XSL script that does a lot of things. For example, it sees the PSU class element and it transforms that into the literal HTML element. Then it applies templates. So then any template that follows is applied. So the following template is intro. So when it sees intro, it will transform that into P and apply templates. When it sees conclusion, it will transform that into P. When it sees emphasis, it will transform that into a bold tag and apply templates. And then there's a close down here off screen. There's a close XSL :transform, which means that the script is over. Okay, so that's a very simple XSL script. In order to make that work, you have to, we'll assume that the XSL processor section 9 is in the same folder as the class.xml file and the class.xsl file. So what we're saying here is that we are going to say invoke Java and use its jar command against this XSL processor, create -o an output called class.html. Its input is going to be class.xml, and its XSL script is going to be class.xsl. Okay, so the resulting file, once we do that, will be this HTML file, which has transformed the PSU root element into HTML and the other elements into paragraphs, and has transformed the emphasis tags into B tags, so that when we finish, when we view it in a browser, it looks very nice. Okay, so that's the conclusion of these slides. So I will ask you to do that last exercise that we talked about, right, where we said to do this. So I'm going to actually walk you through that. So please observe me doing this now and then do it yourself. So because I'm in a Windows environment, I'm going to invoke my command line by going into All Program Files, Accessories, and then hitting this command prompt. What that does is it brings me this nice command prompt. So this is how you do command line processing. Remember, if I was in the Mac, as I said early on, I would have to go into my utilities and double click the terminal app button. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Almost there. Okay, so in this case, what I've done is I've brought up my my command prompt, and I'm going to navigate to where my XSL files are. Okay, so let's see. I said that I want to find the simple. Let me get the slides, make sure that I know where I am. Okay, so in this case, I'm looking for. The source file is class.xml, and the XSLT is class.xsl, and then I'm going to perform this command. And so I know that I downloaded those into my XSL directory. So here's class.xsl. Let's just take a look at that. Or let's look at class.xml first. Okay, and there's my source file, and then class.xsl is the file, the script that I'm going to be using, exactly like we had it in the slides, and I'm going to enter that command right here at the prompt. The first thing I need to do is to navigate to that directory. So this might be a little bit tricky for people who haven't tried this before. Remember, I gave you those tutorials on how to do this. Basically, what you need to do is, if you're in Windows, you do a dir, which shows me what directories I have here. And in this case, I see that where I want to go is desktop. Similarly, in the Mac, if I don't type dir, I type I type ls, which means list, and that will do the same thing as this dir. One of the things that you'll find is that there's a desktop directory, so you'll need to do cd. This is both for Mac or for Windows. desktop, enter, and then I'll do another dir because I'm in Windows. If I were in the Mac, I would do ls, and I see that now that I'm on the desktop, I see that there's my folder called et. So I'll do CD space capital E, capital T, enter. And I'm going to do another dir. And again, in Mac I would do ls. And in this case I see that there's a directory called XML. So I'm going to do CD space XML, enter. And I'm going to do my dir. And then as I showed you before, because of the way I extracted this, I have actually two XML directories. So I see that there's another XML directory. So I'm going to again say CD space XML. By the way, this is case sensitive, so I have to do it correctly like that. So now I see that I'm in my desktop ET XML XML. If I were in Mac, I could do a PWD. I would type PWD, enter, and that would show me where I am. So hopefully you're in your XML directory. So I'll do a dir. Again, on the Mac it would be ls. And I see that I have a directory called XSL. So I'll do CD for change directory, XSL, enter. And I'll do a dir. And finally I see that I have my class.xml and my class.xsl. Because there's a class.xsl, HTML here, I'm going to go ahead and delete that because that's what I'm going to be making. I want to make sure that what I do here got me what I wanted to get. So in the Mac I would have dragged that to my trash can. So now if I do another dir or ls, I see that I don't have class.html. That's good because that's what we're about to make with this command. So I'm going to pull up my command line here and remind myself that I want to type java space -jar space saxon9.jar space -o space class.html space class.xml space class.xsl, and then I'll hit my enter key. And one of the things that's important here is I want to make sure that my saxon9 file is in this directory, which it is. I can see that here. So I'm going to try it. java space -jar space -o space class.html space class.xml space class.xsl. Now, assuming I didn't make any typos, if I hit enter, I did make an error. Unable to access jar file class. Oh, I forgot to enter saxon9. See? My old German grandfather used to say, Brian, if you don't have time to do it right, how will you find the time to do it over? So now let's do it over. java space -jar space saxon9.jar space -o space class.html space class.xml space class.xsl. Now hopefully I didn't make a typo here, so I'll hit my enter key. It's thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it, and what's going on is it's actually creating that HTML file in the background. Notice that we got our command prompt back without any errors this time, so that's happy news. So now if I go back into that directory, I now have a class.html. If I look at it in my text editor, what I can do here is I can just drag it into here. By the way, if you're using Text Wrangler, you need to close the other files. You would actually need to close this, and close this, because if you don't, it'll just it'll concatenate the new file that you drag in to the file that's on the screen. That's bad. Okay, so I'll drag this in here, and sure enough, I now have HTML. It transformed the source file into my desired target file, and if I double click this, it will bring up the browser view, and I see that I have a perfectly valid file that I can, because it's HTML, I can look at it in my browser. So this was a very simple XSL transformation. I hope what you understand is that what we're doing here is we're demonstrating that by using XSL we can transform one form of XML into another form of XML or text. We will be doing more sophisticated transformations as part of the project as this class continues, but please do pause this video. Please do try this exercise yourself, and if it doesn't work for you, please let me know and I will walk you through how to make this work. And again, you will get very comfortable doing this, and it'll be second nature for you, and it will be good because we are going to build on this skill going forward. Okay, so that is the end of our slides. That's the end of this class. I know it was very complicated and probably very new to some of you. Please don't worry. This will be the hardest class of any of the classes that we do, and the rest will come easy. So thank you for that, everybody. Please let me know if you need any help. Thank you. Goodbye.